Dear church, let's talk leading and following. Hello and welcome to the Dear Church podcast. I'm your host, Chris McCurley. Excited about my guest today. My good friend, Aaron Webb, is with us. Just to give you a little insight into who our guest is today. She is a legend here, but maybe our listeners and viewers don't know that Aaron Webb is the head girls basketball coach at Dickson County High School right here in Dickson, Tennessee. And her husband, one of our deacons here and a good friend of mine at Walnut Street. And Aaron, I've said it before many times on this podcast, I like to infuse a couple of my passions, church, preaching, and a few weeks ago it was country music with Jimmy Mattingly, but also sports. Yeah. And so I've had a lot of sports people on, and I wanted to have you come on to provide the unique perspective of coaching and faith. And I think you're one that exemplifies what we talk about when we talk about leading and following. You're leading young ladies on the basketball court in the classroom, but you're also a follower of Christ. And so I wanted to talk about how those things match up and how you balance that. Also your family life, because you've got a big family. Talk a little bit about yourself, about your family, about how things are going right now.
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me on. It means a lot to me for you to say those things. So I'm really appreciative of that. Born and raised in Dickson County, jumped on the opportunity to come back. Chris and I lived several different places for his ministry, and were able to move back for my job, which was interesting. Graduated from Dickson County High School in 2003, met Chris Webb in 2002 in this very building, actually, at the Walnut Street Church of Christ, and got married in 2005. Spent the first several years of our marriage in Centerville, Tennessee at the Centerville Church of Christ, where I actually began my coaching career and teaching, and then moved to Columbia, Tennessee, with his work in the Graymere Church of Christ as their youth minister. And then he transitioned into the Farm Bureau industry. You know, he's working insurance now. And that was mostly because, as you said, we have a big family, and he had his own youth ministry going on at home and decided to step away so that he could spend a little bit more time with our four. Keely Sue, who is 16 years old, and then there's Hunter Webb, who we call him Mudcat. He's 15. Kylie Ray, probably the most athletic kid in our family. She's just turned 8. And then there's Emmy Cole, who's the Spitfire. Yes. There's a reason the last child is a last child. So if you're listening and you're a last child, there's a reason. And she's 6 years old. And so just excited to raise my family where I was raised. Yeah.
And your mom and dad are in the community, and you've got so many friends.
So many family members, both sides of our family. Yeah. Almost all of my aunts and uncles still live in this town. And we've got cousins everywhere. I've got baby cousins that are in the high school. I've got a couple of them in class. And, just to get to watch them grow and with my children, that's especially awesome.
Was that difficult? Was it like a prophet in your own country kind of thing to come back and be in a high profile position like head girls basketball coach in the town where you grew up, where you know so many people, you're related to so many people? Has that been an easy thing because you are from here and people know you, or has it been tougher?
I remember the night that it was announced that I was going to be the head coach, and we were at Vacation Bible School here in town. I had brought my kids in. I actually asked Keely, she was getting ready to go into 5th grade, which in Columbia is a middle school grade. Yeah. The elementary ends at 4th grade, and then middle school is 5th through 8th. And so I asked her, before I even applied for the job, if you could go to high school anywhere. It's kind of an odd question for an upcoming 5th grader, but if you could go to high school anywhere, where would you choose? And she said, well, probably Dickson County, where you went.
Really? Okay.
Because I had brought her to a couple of homecomings, and she just loved it. We had been to several ball games to watch one of my cousins, Sierra Morgan, play, and she just loved the atmosphere, and she knew that it's where I went to school. And I have found that Keely likes to kind of emulate the things that I do, which is really scary.
Well, that's cool.
It's pretty cool, but it's really scary. And she said Dickson County High School, and I just thought in my head, really? So we were actually visiting VBS that night, and they announced it, I guess, via Twitter or, however it goes out. And it went all over the place that this is the new head coach. And I remember, so cool, Jennifer Spann and Tracy Williams were in the cradle roll when I took Emmy in there. And they just started clapping and hooping and hollering. And Andrea Spencer and a lot of her girlfriends were really rooting for me that night. And Chris Hedge walks over and he said, I want you to read this text from a couple of weeks ago. And he had sent a text out that said, if Dickson County is going to hire a girls coach, they need to hire Aaron Webb.
Yeah.
And, it was just really cool feeling that kind of support. And so I really have felt so welcomed and just really encouraged the entire time.
Yeah.
There are times where in our season we're not as successful as I know our community would like to see, and as a coach I would like to see, and even our players. But it's never been negative. It's always been, just keep grinding, stay in there, do what you do, and that's really neat from a hometown perspective.
And I'm sure you know this story better than I do, but I was told that when they were looking for that next coach, they had some folks that didn't stay very long. They were from out of town, and I think they asked the players, from what I understand, is if we could hire somebody who is good but will come and maybe stay a year or two and then go on to the next job, or we could hire somebody that is a local and would stay, which would you rather have? And they overwhelmingly are like, no, we want somebody that's going to stay and somebody that's going to invest in us. And that's what they got.
Well, those kids had experienced, 4 or 5 different coaches from middle school up through high school. I remember my first year here, I had a sophomore who was one of those, and she had had 4 different coaches, and she was struggling mentally more than anything. She had had some, as teenage girls' years can go, she had had some real struggles, just teenage years in general, but especially for a girl and an athlete and a really tall athlete. She just had been struggling, and I was trying to connect with her, and I had meetings with each of my players my first year coming in just to kind of get to know them because I had missed all of summer ball. And so I wanted to just put faces with names and get to know them a little bit. And she looked at me and she said, why does it matter? You're not going to stay. And I said,
that hit hard.
I'm telling you right now, I'll be here longer than you are. And I saw her at a game a few weeks ago. Yeah. And I said, I'm still here. She said, I know you are. And she gave me the biggest hug. It's one of those things that I know they were really looking for, was just some security and knowing that they were going to have somebody that invested in them for the long term.
And you have that bigger picture idea. It's never been just about wins and losses. No. When you first got here, a lot of success early. This year has been a little bit different in that, you're rebuilding. Yes. Girls are young. Your daughter plays and was the key players on the team, and she's just a sophomore. So you've got a lot of growing, and they've grown. I said it the other day. I didn't tell you this. This is probably your best coaching job, in my opinion, because you took a group of girls that were very young and green and just didn't know a whole lot. And case in point, the other night you beat a team by 20 that you lost to twice by 20. Yes. That says something to what you're doing with these girls. But talk a little about, you were telling me before we got on air, how you had a difficult time midway through the season. You lost several games in a row by a lot of points, and you felt like something needed to change. Tell that story.
Well, we had played 2 games at home, which home games are big for us this year. Yes. For those of you that have followed our season, it's been a little bit wild. And we had 2 games back-to-back against huge rivals. Henry County beat us on Thursday night by 40. Clarksville came on Friday night and beat us by 35. And morale was just low. Both really good teams. Mm-hmm. Henry County, a district opponent. Clarksville being a regional opponent with an outstanding player in Amari Berry. And it was just a very low morale moment. And we go into the locker room, and we're late in the season now. So the speech of, stay in there and remember what we're playing for, it's kind of fallen on deaf ears now, because it's been said all season long. And here we are getting to where we should be starting to see some improvement. And it just didn't feel like there was much of that going on. And I just decided something had to change. We have to do something different. These girls are tired. Their bodies are beat up. They've given me everything they've got. Yeah. It's not a question of, are you giving me everything? It's, what do you have left? And I just made the decision one day, you know what, we're going to practice. We're going to be in the gym together. The girls need to shoot. Yeah. But we're not going to run the court. We're not going to be, their bodies, again, they need rest. Mm-hmm. And I felt like mentally they needed rest. I have amazing assistant coaches, and I just told them, let them be in the gym. Let's listen to music. Let them shoot. And I just pulled them one by one into my classroom. And in the classroom, my friend Tony Tucker had helped me set up a table that just had snacks on it and candy and water. And she has all these cute little stickers because that's who she is. And we put them on the table with some tissues because I didn't know what the day might bring. And I just wanted to talk to them and just sit down one-on-one in a comfortable chair. And they all kind of walked in a little bit skeptical, like, what's going on? And it was just really just a wellness checkup. Like, I want to know how you're doing in school. I want to know how your body feels. Tell me what you're doing outside of basketball, because it gets to the point where you're with the same group of people all day, and that can be exhausting. Day after day, you're doing the same thing. You're beating your body up. You're taking some mental beatings like we had that week and some big losses in front of your home crowd. You know, kids are saying things at school that aren't helpful, and I just wanted to check on them. You know, I learned things about each one of those kids that I didn't know. And that's important as a coach, especially I think to get the best out of your kids is to know where they are. And that was a pivotal moment for us. There was definitely a change after that. Del Reagan said something to me on Wednesday night. He let us into the building, held the door for us, and he said, I don't know what you said to your kids, but it's working. And I really, when I think back, I think it was that day. I don't think it was anything I said. I think it was just letting them be heard. Just letting them know, like, I love you outside of basketball. This is what you can do on the court is awesome, but that's not who you are. And that's not what I care the most about. And I think that was pivotal.
I think it is too. And I think your example is pivotal. So talk about that, how I tell my kids are grown now. They're all in jobs. One's a coach, although I try to persuade him.
Bless his heart.
One's a coach, one's a speech pathologist, and one is a church secretary right now, but was in pathology. I said, all of you have a unique opportunity to use your job as ministry. And I think probably most people have that opportunity. You get that. So what is your overall philosophy, strategy, or whatever, when you have a girl in your program from the 9th grade, and by the time she graduates, what do you want her to get out of her experience with you?
Well, you know, I'm in the unique position to where when I started coaching, my husband was in youth ministry. And so I never separated the two. And even today that he's not in youth ministry, it still feels like that to me. I'm just teaching and coaching in general. You know, I'm a true believer in that sometimes the only Bible these kids are ever going to read is their interaction with people who are Christians. And something you said yesterday from the pulpit really hit home with me. When you said, if you're a Christian, act like it. Let that joy come out in your life. And, you know, sometimes these kids come from places that are difficult and challenging because their families are going through difficult or challenging times. I have a student on my team that's involved in my team right now. She's not a player, but she's involved in my team. Her mom has cancer and she's going through chemo. That's hard as a kid. I experienced that. My sophomore year, my mom was going through chemo treatments. And, you know, I feel like God gives us experiences that we can help other people through. And that's one of them. But, you know, it's just, for me, seeing these kids not as just players, not just as students, but as people that God created, loved enough to send his son for. That's a huge when you start looking at people through that lens. And for me, as a 9th grader coming in, some people are starting their faith journey. Some people have no idea. I have a young lady on my team right now who's using her mom's Bible because she didn't have one. And her mom had one from when she went to a Christian school, and they had made her have one. And she said, it's really neat. I get to see the highlights and the notes my mom made.
That's awesome.
But she's starting her journey. She told me the other day, I really want to start studying the Bible. And Keely and I were at Hobby Lobby the other day, and we picked that kid up a Bible. You know, she's going to leave my program with a Bible, at least, if nothing else. But for me, just I won't apologize for sharing my faith. And I know that that's not necessarily something that's encouraged, but I'm not going to not do that. I tell people all the time, there's worse things to get fired for.
Well,
and
that's who you are, right?
I mean, it just is. And like you said, if it's something that's truly who you are, it needs to come out. And so, you know, I'm not saying that's perfect all the time. There are days I look at my students in class and I say, listen, I need you to know I had a rough morning. and it's not your fault at all. So if I'm a little bit short with you, or if I'm a little bit irritated, I'm going to go ahead and apologize in advance and just show them that that's real. Yeah. Sometimes I have to do that retroactively. I come in after a ball game and I'll say, you know what, I'll see you tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And then the next day I have to explain, I was afraid that what I had to say after that ball game was going to be personal and hurtful. Right. And that's not who I am. And so I didn't want to say anything. So I'm going to follow back up with you guys and let you know that me not talking after the game last night had nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
It had me doing what I needed to do to taste my words before I speak them and make sure I didn't say anything that I couldn't take back that might be hurtful.
I've been in that boat.
Oh, man.
And that is one of the toughest things, is to keep your Christianity when you're coaching, because you feel like a call should have gone your way, or whatever.
And a referee, you're like,
or a child, doesn't do exactly what we'd work. Yeah, I mean, you work on it. You say, this is what's going to happen. They go out there and do the exact opposite. That's frustrating. Absolutely. But you seem to handle that well. I mean, you're not a yeller and a screamer. You're not a foot stomper. And especially with Keely, you're coaching your own daughter, who, you may not say it, but I will. If she doesn't play well, y'all don't really play well. And so, but you seem to do a really good job of keeping that, not crossing a line, not treating her too harshly because she's your daughter, but also not treating her too.
She might disagree with that.
Well, I think it's pretty obvious when we watch it from the stands. Talk about that, the balance of all this. So, coaching your daughter, then at home, and, for me, it was always hard when I got home to turn it off. My kids were small enough; they didn't care that we won. They didn't even know what I did, really. Right. And so I've got to be present in the moment. Talk about the difficulty of that, the balance of that, of being present in the moment and saying, okay, I'm mom now. Mm-hmm. The coaching is, leave that over here, and I've got to be a mom.
I'm definitely going to talk about that, but I feel like I would be failing your audience if I didn't say, if your kids are playing ball, just be their parent.
Yeah.
Most kids are not on the court to make us upset. Most kids are not on the court to mess up. They're out there because they loved the game at some point. I was at my 8-year-old's game yesterday, and it just discourages me sometimes to hear parents, and I know they're competitive and I know they mean well. I really in their heart think that they don't think about it. But I'm listening to a parent yell at one of the players on the opposing team, and I mean, she's getting after her, and it breaks my heart, because I think this is a 6-year-old, 7-year-old, 8-year-old who is playing basketball because it's fun, or at least she thought it was going to be. And I think sometimes we get too competitive and we forget that our kids are kids, and basketball's fun. Let them play.
It was meant to be fun.
Don't let them perform. Don't make them perform. Let them play. And I find myself having to remind myself of that with Keely. When she started playing in middle school, 6th grade, I had been the coach here for 2 years. And Chris and I were already talking about, how are you going to coach her? Yeah. Are you going to stick around to coach her? I hadn't decided yet, because my relationship with her as her mother is way more important than our relationship as a coach and a player.
No doubt.
I love her so much more than basketball, and so I have to tell her that all the time. Yeah. And I remember as a 6th grader, she would tell me after, Mom, how did I play? Huh. And I would just stop her and say, are you asking Mom, or are you asking Coach Webb? Because those are two different people. Right. And we started that separation early, because I wanted her to know, as her mother, you were the cutest kid out there. I think you're perfect and awesome. And, your energy was so much fun. But if you're asking as Coach Webb, I would like for you to play with a little more confidence. I would like for you to, stay under control. Sometimes she gets really emotional, and especially as a middle school kid, she'd get really emotional. Just remember that it's basketball and it's fun, and I relax a little bit. And that's still conversations that we have, but it was really important to separate that. And to this day, after the game, I don't say anything to her about it unless she says something. I let her initiate that. There was one game last year as a freshman, and she had an outstanding year as a freshman. I was so proud of her as her mother and as her coach. But she had a rough game at Kenwood. And I remember we were winning pretty big, but I was asking them to do something specifically, because we were practicing something that we knew we were going to need going forward. We had a great year last year.
Sure.
And she was not executing. Mm-hmm. And so as Coach Webb, I had to coach her hard.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's loud. As a coach, sometimes you're loud.
Right.
And it was hard. I had to coach her hard. I pulled her out of the game. I explained to her what I needed her to do. She went in, took her a couple of more tries, but when she did it, it was excellent. I mean, she got 3 steals in a row doing the one that her team did. We were able to get 3 steals in a row because she was where she was supposed to be. Yeah. And after the game, I just pulled her in my lap in the locker room. Everybody else had left. And I said, hey, Coach Webb, she coached you hard tonight.
Yeah.
And I need you to know that Mama never stopped loving you at any point. Yeah. Coach Webb never stopped loving you. Yeah. But Coach Webb had to coach you hard tonight. And I know that's tough. Mm-hmm. And now you have to go home with me, and it's going to be hard separating the Coach Webb that was hard on you tonight and the mom who loves you unconditionally.
Yeah.
And that was a big moment for us because, and it's not easy. Don't hear me say that it's perfect all the time.
It's not. No, because I had the same experience coaching my son. It's tough because you do a good job of separating it, but there's even, we talk about our kids having a hard time separating it. I had a hard time sometimes separating it, remembering, okay, Chris, it's time to turn that off.
Yes.
Come back over here because you see so much potential and you see that there's an opportunity here. You have a practice, I guess it is, or a principle that I'm just fascinated by. We go out quite often. Our families hang out, although you're a different stage in life than I am with my kids grown. You were almost there and decided to have 2 other kids. So, you that's your fault.
We do.
But anyway, but we hang out quite a bit and we go to supper and your little ones, 8 and 6, they'll try to weasel in between you and Chris to sit down. And you always say, nobody sits between you and your husband, including your kids. We sit together and y'all can sit here beside me, but we sit together. Talk about the example of, because I've always said it, you love others best when you love God the most. And in a marriage, your kids come third because it's God, it's you and your spouse, because that's what came first anyway. And then your kids, and your kids will not be hurt by that. In fact, they will only be helped. Talk a little bit about that and where that comes from.
I'll never forget Hunter Webb, 3 or 4 years old, looks at me and says, Mom, I don't want to hurt your feelings, but I love Daddy more than you. And I said, buddy, I don't want to hurt your feelings, but I love Daddy more than you. And he said, well, that's not nice. But that started early for us. I wanted my kids to know that their daddy comes first for me before you. Like you said, God is first for both of us. And your daddy loves God more than me, but only God more than me. And I love God more than your daddy, but only God more than your daddy. And then you guys come after that. The reason for that is at some point, those kids are going to leave us. That is the goal.
Absolutely.
Now, in this moment, I don't want that to happen anytime soon. I love having my 4 at home. I love, and we think about Keely. We have 2 summers left with Keely before she goes to college. And so that time slipping it's scary. It does help that we have several more with Emmy, but we also know with experience that that's going to go by really fast. It does. But at some point, it's going to be Chris and I at dinner. And I want to make sure that we preserve that. The kids at church even, they try to sit between me and Chris. I'm like, no. One day you're going to be sitting, hopefully, in a congregation with your family worshiping our God. And it's going to be me and Daddy sitting right here.
Sure.
And we're going to preserve that as long as we can. And so
I love that.
For us, Keely and Hunter didn't like that as kids, and Kylie Ray and Emmy are coming to terms with it now. But that's just our policy. Like, nobody sits between me and Daddy because nothing comes between me and Daddy. And as long as you know your role in that, that's fine. And I want them to want that one day. And I tell them, one day you'll have kids, and I hope that you'll cherish your husband or your wife for Hunter's sake more than you do your kids, because kids are going to grow up and hopefully find their person, and they're going to hopefully get married and have that relationship that we have. And I want my kids to want that based off of what they see. So no, you don't get to sit between Mama and Daddy. That's not.
It makes a statement.
It does.
It's a small thing really in the grand scheme of things, but it's a big thing too, because it's making a statement to your kids of priorities. And that's why I like it. And I think,
but I'll say too, it makes a statement for me when Chris is the one that says, because I'm usually the one that says, no, not between me and Daddy. But it makes a statement to me when Chris goes, you can't sit there. Mama and Daddy sit next to each other.
Yes.
And for me, I'm like, he wants that too. He cherishes that too.
Absolutely. Because I'm a case study in empty nest and
Yes.
the good and the bad and the ugly and all of it, because I think we've lived through it. But, about 3 days into it, maybe a little longer than that, Lydia looked at me and she goes, there's about as many positives as there are negatives here. And, of course, that's all going to depend on if you have a good relationship with your spouse. You don't want to get to that point, like you said, where they're all at the house. You look at your husband across the table or your wife and you go, who are you? Like, I don't even know.
I do have friends who struggle with that. I have adult friends who have kids, and some of them are kids from a previous marriage or from before they were married. And so I can understand that they cherish that child more maybe than a relationship that didn't work out. But I do have some friends that are challenged by that a little bit. I just don't know how you could ever tell your child that you don't love them the most.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, I have 4 of them too. So I can't really tell one that I love them the most. I do that to all 4 of them secretly.
Yes, exactly.
But, I encourage some of my friends to really challenge their thinking on that because, again, at the end of the day, you want to wake up in an empty nest situation and look at that person and go, you really are my best friend. And I'm really excited about this next chapter of our lives.
Yes, I agree.
Mm-hmm.
Let's wrap this up by you telling us, in all of this, what has been the biggest blessing in coaching and using coaching as a ministry and all that? What's been the biggest blessing?
I'll be honest. I think any coach you ask this to that doesn't say what I know that you believe and that I'm going to say, they either haven't been coaching long enough to experience it, or they're not doing it right. And I would challenge anybody that questions me on that. But man, it's just seeing your kids grow.
Yeah.
We have hundreds of daughters, Chris and I.
Yes.
And it's fun to me. I have one now who's in a relationship. She's precious. She's in a relationship, and it's getting to where, she's marriage age-ish,
Right.
Getting there. And she told her boyfriend the other day, she said, you'd have to ask Chris Webb for permission too. Like, not just my dad. You're going to have to talk to Chris Webb too.
That's awesome.
It is. And, things like that. I have one girl, my favorite story probably, I hesitate to say favorite athlete because I have several who are daughters to me. She lives in San Francisco with her husband, and I have to, of course, name drop. Jake Brindle is her husband. He was the
for the 49ers.
Starting center for the 49ers in the Super Bowl this past week. And so she FaceTimes me very often just to let me see her little girl and to keep in touch. But she was one that I had the pleasure of coaching from 6th to 11th grade. She caught me in my transition between middle and high school, and I coached her in volleyball and softball in our time in Centerville.
Yep.
And I would invite the girls all the time, come to the youth group. My husband's a youth minister. Come to the youth group. Come do stuff with us. We're having basketball night, or we're having a Bible study, or it's Bible class. And she always wanted to go, but she never had a ride.
Yeah.
And Zan's mom finally asked me, she said, do you mind just taking her? I was like, of course I will. If you're good with that. I mean, she could come with me anytime. And her only rule was Zan's homework had to be finished.
Okay.
And so I would take Zan to a Bible study. And there was one night on our way home from Wednesday night worship, I was taking her home, and her sweet little precious 7th grade face looked at me, and you can never be upset with this face. Right. She looked at me and she said, hey, Coach Webb, I still have 3 math homework, 3 math problems to do. And I was like, oh, we're going to be in trouble. And I made 4 loops around her neighborhood driving so she could finish these math problems before I dropped her off. And, those are the relationships, the 2 games I told you at home that were just rough. Yeah. I came out of the locker room that night just defeated. I mean, I had nothing left, and I needed something for these girls. And I walk out of the locker room, and there's Riley Moore and Anisha Taylor and Hannah Ingram, 3 of my most favorites. And I walk out, and there they are. And that's what I needed.
Yeah.
I needed hugs, and to know that, and a reminder, very visual reminder of it's so much bigger than basketball.
It is.
For sure. Probably walking out and seeing them is what encouraged me or inspired me to have those individual meetings with them later.
Yeah.
But, Brene Snow sends me a picture, it's my favorite picture. She's sitting like this, fixing to go under the waters of baptism. Oh, she sends me that. Yeah. Brayla Johnson, one of my sophomores, she texts me, I got baptized this weekend. Yeah. Lily Fernandez and Leah Taylor both, Coach, I want to study my Bible more. I want to spend more time in that. Listening to my daughter pray over our team every game. Yes. Those are the moments. That's what it's about.
That is what it's about. That is awesome. And I appreciate you coming on today and sharing all of that with us. And I appreciate everyone tuning in to the podcast. I appreciate so much, you spreading the word about what we're doing here. We're on Spotify, we're on YouTube, we're on Facebook, and of course, Apple Podcast. If you have a question about today's episode, feel free to email me at chris.mccurley@rippleoflight.com. If you have a question specifically for Erin, we'll make sure that it gets forwarded to her, and I'm sure she'd be happy to answer any questions or comments that you might have. Erin, thank you so much for being on today.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. This was great, and thank you all for tuning in. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. Sincerely, Chris.